Hey guys, welcome to the second day of the art vlog. Today we're going to do something traditional, so we're going to have pencils, we're going to have Letraset markers, we're going to have inking pens, we're going to be drawing Wolverine, got some reference material out, Wolverine comic, recent Wolverine and the X-Men issue, and printed out just some shots of the 3D model that I extracted from Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. We'll get going. We've got a makeshift tripod just here, so that should angle the camera just down at the page so you can then see what I'm doing. As you can tell from all the lights that are on, we are running out of daylight because it's that wonderful time of year again. So I do apologise if the lighting's a little off, but yeah, I'm kind of nervous. I've not worked with traditional materials in quite some time, but we'll give it a shot.
So what I'm doing right now are sort of the rough pencils. Rough pencils, you're just working out where you want everything to be, what sort of pose and posture you're going for, making sure that sort of things like anatomy, things like that are down as they should be. It's very rough and it's a very fun part of drawing. I always start with the head, which is a bad pivot point because the head never tells you exactly how much of the page you're going to be using, whether you're going to be efficient within the page. I use the head because I'm comfortable with it, and where I usually draw digitally, I've picked up a bad habit where if I do start to get to the edge of the page, I'll just increase the size of my canvas. On paper, naturally, I can't do that. I get to the edge of the page, I've got to the edge of the page, tough luck. What I'll then look to do once, naturally, the muscles are down, sort of the basic anatomy is down, is I'll go in and I'll start actually layering things up. So this is when I'll look at, the torso muscles, the arm muscles, biceps, things like that, and start putting some real definition and form to it. I will look at the muscle structure that's underneath the character, regardless of whether I'm putting clothes on top of that, and regardless of whether the viewer will be able to see those muscles later on. The reason being is that if you don't bother with that, and if the underlying muscle structure isn't there, anyone who looks at your piece will be able to tell that you didn't bother, and it won't quite look right. It's also a very easy way to make mistakes, and suddenly have arms and joints that look dislocated and out of place. One thing that you should always try and avoid is, anyone not quite looking human, especially if they're a human character. From there, I then look to lay the clothes on top, so thinking about how those clothes would fall and fold with the effects of gravity. Because I'm drawing Wolverine, who's a superhero, I don't so much need to worry about this because those things are skin tight. Once that's all complete and wrapped up, I will then go in again and basically start laying down some fine detail, planning out where certain bits on the costume are, things like that, getting the eyes in, getting the actual final structure in. And from there, usually you would proceed to what's called clean pencils. So what I tend to do is I tend to skip clean pencils altogether and go straight to inks if I'm inking my own work. Clean pencils are basically when you say to an inker, right, this is the final thing, this is exactly what I want to see, there are no unnecessary lines left, all of the lines I use just to figure out where things should be are now gone, draw this. Because I'm inking my own work, there's no need for me to do that. I'm going to make those decisions and make those little adjustments and little changes as I'm actively inking the piece. If I were to do clean pencils and then do inks, essentially I'd be doing the same job twice. Now what I am being very careful with in the inking stage is something called my line weight. A line weight is essentially how thick your line is. So a light line would be a very thin line, a heavy line would be a very thick line. At this point, I need to know where my light source is going to be, because black is essentially your darkest shade and the darkest colour that you will have on your palette. If you have a light directly above your arm and you put your arm up to the light, naturally the shadow is going to be underneath, so you want a thicker line on the bottom of the arm as opposed to the top of the arm. You can also use the line weights to denote mass, so something that's a bit bigger on the body should have a thicker line weight to it. Anything that's just sort of a fine detail or a little scratch or tiny things like teeth, bits like that, should be on a very fine line, whereas things that are a bit more chunky, so say like a big bicep, that should be a thick line preferably. Using these, you then ink to make the image look a little bit more dynamic and make it just pop and really have that sense that it's no longer on just a two-dimensional plane. It's a bit of a tricky balance and not something I've quite got yet. One tip I will give for when you're inking, for God's sake remember you can rotate a page. I've seen people sort of bend around a page all sorts of weird ways to get the angle they want when they're drawing. Just move the page. It's so much easier. So from inking, we'll then let this dry, we'll erase our pencil marks, and then we can move on to colour.
Wow, it got dark quick. What we're doing now is letting the ink dry, because if I go in to erase my pencil lines right now, I'm going to smudge the lines way worse than some of them have already smudged just where I've been drawing. Once they're all dry, we'll then go in, we'll erase out the pencil lines, and then we can start applying some colour. So that you can see it properly, here's the inked version again. So all I've done is gone in and just removed the pencil marks that were underneath, so now we're just left with the crisp black lines. When you are removing the pencils, do be careful not to actually affect the crisp lines themselves. You don't want to start taking the ink up on the rubber as well, otherwise you're going to cause yourself smudging and numerous other problems. What we're going to do now is dive straight into colour. So we've got a selection of colours here. A very, very sunshiny yellow, then into an orange and a red so that we can colour the main parts of Wolverine's suit. Really, we want to go down not just in colour. When you're colouring something that's yellow, you don't just want to use yellows that get darker and darker. You actually want to go through different shades and colours so that there's more of a hue and more of a change there. The light blue is for the claws, and then I've only really got the one blue that's suitable for the rest of Wolverine at the moment. If I had a darker blue, I would be using, more than just one blue, but that's what I've got to work with. Let's get straight to getting this thing coloured.
Alright, so now we get to colour, and colour is one of my weaker areas at the moment and something I am looking to work on. Naturally, with markers, it's not something I usually use. Typically, I will go in and I will colour things digitally. With the markers, what I will always do is denote which areas are going to be white first, because there's only one white, and that's what's on the page. Once you cover that up, that is gone. So what I tend to do is I tend to mark those areas out, and then I will work from the lightest colour I'm going to use for an area through to the darkest colour I'm going to use in that area. Again, if I cover up a light colour with a dark colour, that's it, that's fine. If I were to go from a dark colour to a light colour, that's going to be a lot trickier to do on actual physical paper. Digitally, when I'm working in Photoshop and I have layers, things like that, I can work in whatever order I want. I can go from dark to light, light to dark, I can go from mid-tone to light to dark, I can play around with it in any way, shape or form. Paper, I don't have that luxury, so I would always recommend light to dark. It's just going to make things a lot easier in that regard. What I'm also doing is just trying to make sure that every tone I use is appropriate, and trying to make sure that what I'm putting down now in shadow will match up with what I've already put down in the line weights for naturally lighter and darker areas of the image. In addition to this, you also have to factor in that these markers do allow for what's called bleed, in that they're made to be mixed with each other, but they can also mix with the ink that you've just used for your line art. So if you're not careful, you can smear it and get what I call a dirty colour. In some cases, for example stubble, this can be highly effective. It can actually help you. But for everything else, really, you'll want to go round the edges first so that you've put a barrier between the line and the colour so that you don't end up smearing this dirty colour across your entire page. It's one of those things that can really ruin a piece, because you can be there for ages not thinking, go through a line and just get this smear of a grey version of your colour across the image. It's been the subject of many a rage out before, and naturally I want to avoid anyone else having to deal with the same thing. I've not quite mastered getting around it. It still occurs, and it will occur on this image in a few places, but I have managed to minimise it by just essentially tracing my own line art and going around my own line art before then filling in any areas of colour. Had to change the battery in the camera, but there's very little colouring left to do at this point, mainly just the dark areas in the blue and some of the skin tone. With that complete, that will then finish up the drawing itself, and it will be ready to scan in and upload. Okay, so that's that complete. That is Wolverine done traditionally.
I had to do a little bit of a pause because the camera was about to run out of battery, but that's all done. I'll get this up on DeviantArt as soon as possible so that you can get a proper look at it as well. You know, just take a look at it at full scale instead of through the video. But yeah, I think tomorrow we'll either do some 3D modelling or potentially some digital drawing. But it felt good to just break out the traditional stuff, give it a go again, and just make sure that I still know relatively what I'm doing.